Did you know that one mistake could cost millions of lives? In this story, the USA decided the fate of the war in just a few days. If you're interested in the truth about World War II, subscribe and hit the like button. There are many shocking facts ahead. April 7th, 1945. Picture yourself on the restless waves of the East China Sea, 200 miles north of Okinawa. The sky stretches wide and cold, the water churning beneath your feet. On board the mighty Yamato, Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida's hand trembles as he scribbles into his private journal words that, if intercepted by the ship's officers, could seal his fate. Can this be what the admirals promised us, he wonders? Can any battleship, no matter how colossal, withstand what is about to emerge from the horizon? Look through the radar scope. Hundreds of aircraft signatures explode across the screen like deadly blossoms converging from every direction, moving at speeds the Yamato could never hope to evade. Imagine standing on her decks 72,000 tons of steel and firepower, armed with the heaviest naval guns ever built. And yet, here she is, facing an enemy that no amount of armor or artillery could hope to repel. In the minds of Japanese strategists, this ship was invincible. But now, in these open waters, a new and unforgiving reality is writing the final chapter of the battleship's reign. That morning, 3,332 men moved through her decks, her corridors, her gun turrets. None could foresee that history was unfolding beneath their feet. They were on the last great sortie of a battleship, a desperate gamble that would end not in glory, but in a merciless aerial slaughter. Have you ever imagined the helplessness of standing on a fortress that even your bravest instincts cannot defend? The battle would not be decided by thick armor or giant shells, but by a simple, inexorable equation the admirals refused to see. One battleship, no matter how mighty, could not defeat nearly 400 aircraft under full air superiority. Less than 2 hours would erase confidence, replacing it with catastrophe. But the seeds of this fate were planted years earlier in the secretive halls of Kura Naval Arsenal. Between 1934 and 1937, Japanese naval architects pursued a singular obsession. If they could not outnumber American warships, they would make vessels so formidable that a single ship could overpower 2 or even 3 enemy battleships. Captain Kikuo Fujimoto, brilliant and controversial, unveiled his vision to the Naval General Staff in March 1934. A battleship displacing 70,000 tons at full load, armed with 9 18.1-inch guns, armored with belts up to 16 inches thick. These were specifications that laughed in the face of international naval treaties and surpassed anything the world had ever seen. Construction began in November 1937, cloaked in the utmost secrecy. Workers signed pledges under threat of imprisonment. Neighbors had their windows shuttered, and tall barriers and palm trees masked the colossal works. When Yamato's sister ship, Musashi, slid into Nagasaki's waters in November 1940, the city went on air raid alert. All civilians were forced indoors to shield their eyes from witnessing the enormous vessel. And the deception worked. American intelligence would not know the true scale of the Yamato class until the war had ended. Yamato herself was commissioned on December 16, 1941, just 9 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor. She measured 263 meters from bow to stern with a beam of 38.9 meters, and at nearly 72,000 tons fully loaded, she became the heaviest battleship ever constructed. Imagine the sheer enormity of it, a floating citadel of steel and firepower, yet about to confront the merciless arithmetic of modern warfare. Could anything so grand survive the storm approaching from the skies? Imagine standing on the deck of the Yamato, the sea stretching endlessly around you, the morning mist swirling like ghostly smoke from the boilers. Before you loom 9 Type 9-4 naval guns, each one 21.13 meters long, weighing a staggering 147.3 metric tons. These were not just weapons, they were monuments to human ambition, capable of hurling 1,460-kilogram shells up to 42 kilometers, sending more than 13,000 kilograms of steel toward any enemy in a single thunderous salvo. Could anything survive such fury? And yet, the ship's defenses were equally formidable. The main belt armor was 16.1 inches thick, slanted at 20 degrees to maximize its strength. The main deck ranged from 7.9 inches over the machinery to 9 inches above the magazines. The face plates of the gun turrets, 25.6 inches of solid steel, were heavier than anything ever fitted to a warship. Below the waterline, an intricate torpedo defense system created compartments that could flood or remain empty, designed to absorb the shock of 3 torpedoes on the same side without catastrophic failure. But as we know, the true test of this armor would come on April 7th. Yamato's secondary armament initially included 12 155 guns and 4 triple turrets, and 12 127 dual-purpose guns and 6 twin mounts. Anti-aircraft defense, however, was pitifully weak. Just 24 25mm guns, a reflection of the Imperial Japanese Navy's fatal underestimation of the skies. How could anyone imagine that such oversight would soon become a death sentence? Powering this floating fortress were 12 compound boilers driving 4 steam turbines, producing 150,000 shaft horsepower. This immense engine pushed the massive hull to 27.4 knots during sea trials, a remarkable feat for a vessel of such weight. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind Pearl Harbor, chose Yamato as his flagship on February 12, 1942. Yamamoto, one of the few Japanese officers who truly understood the power of naval aviation, had opposed the construction of battleships like Yamato, arguing that resources would be better spent on carriers. Yet even he could not resist the prestige of commanding the mightiest battleship afloat. Yamato's first combat deployment came in May 1942 during the Battle of Midway. Imagine the admiral aboard, positioning his fleet 300 miles behind the carrier strike force, ready to strike the Americans with unimaginable firepower. And then the plan collapsed spectacularly. American carrier aircraft located and destroyed 4 Japanese fleet carriers in a single day. Yamato never fired a shot. She turned back toward Japan, untested in battle, untouched by combat. This pattern repeated throughout her career. Despite guns capable of obliterating any ship at ranges beyond enemy reach, Yamato spent most of the war lurking in anchorages, her fuel too precious, her value too immense to risk against the overwhelming power of American aircraft. Between July 1942 and June 1941, she lingered in Truk Lagoon in the Caroline Islands, serving primarily as flagship and floating barracks. Crew members lectured, drilled, and waited for a battle that never came. By late 1943, the tide had turned disastrously against Japan. The Imperial Japanese Navy had lost countless destroyers, cruisers, and carriers across the Solomons and in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. American submarines strangled Japanese oil shipments, creating critical fuel shortages. Yamato returned to Japan in December 1943 for modifications. 2 of the 4 triple 155 millisecondary turrets were removed and replaced with additional anti-aircraft weapons, boosting light AA from 24 to 52 guns. Radar systems were installed. By March 1944, she emerged as a more balanced warship, but the era of battleship dominance had already passed. Her main guns would only taste combat once, in October 1944 during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita led a surface-striking force through San Bernardino Strait, with Yamato and her sister ship Musashi aiming to crush the American landing forces at Leyte. On October 24th, during the Battle of the Sibuyan Sea, American carrier aircraft descended upon Musashi in relentless waves. Over 4 hours, she absorbed 17 bomb hits and 19 torpedoes before capsizing, with over 1,000 of her crew lost. Yamato watched from 30 miles away. The lesson was brutal and clear. No armor, no matter how thick, could withstand the fury of massed aerial assault. At 6:57 on the morning of October 25, 1944, Yamato fired her main guns at enemy ships for the first and only time. The range, 35,000 yards. Ahead lay 6 American escort carriers, lightly defended. Could the world's largest and most powerful battleship finally prove her legend? Or was she now a titan facing inevitable doom? These were the ships of Taffy III, providing vital air support to ground forces on Leyte. For nearly 2 relentless hours, Yamato pursued the American vessels, thunderous salvo after salvo raining from her massive guns. Imagine the deafening roar, the shock waves trembling through the steel decks as shells slammed into the escort carrier USS White Plains, detonating beneath its keel and leaving devastation in their wake. Yamato contributed to the sinking of the escort carrier USS Gambia Bay and the destroyers USS Johnston and USS Howell. Triumph, perhaps, but at what cost? Even in moments of apparent victory, the limitations of the battleship became painfully clear. The American destroyers charged straight at the Japanese fleet in seemingly suicidal attacks. Yet their courage was more than bravery. It was decisive. Vice Admiral Kurita, convinced he faced fleet carriers rather than escort carriers and wary of submarine threats, ordered a general retreat just as his battleships were on the cusp of reaching the American landing beaches. Could you imagine commanding a force of Titans only to be forced to turn away by the audacity of smaller ships? As Yamato withdrew, American carrier aircraft from the main fleet caught up, bombing her weather deck and claiming the lives of several crew members. By late 1944, Japan's position was desperate. The Central Pacific was lost, the Philippines were being liberated, and American forces were preparing assaults within bombing range of the home islands. The combined fleet had been shattered, and Yamato returned to Japan in November 1944, entering dry dock at Kure for repairs. On November 25th, while transiting the East China Sea, Yamato's battle group came under attack from the American submarine USS Silion, which sank the battleship Congo and a destroyer. Yamato emerged unscathed, a massive colossus dodging death beneath the waves. In Kure, the final months of 1944 were spent bolstering her defenses. Additional 25mm anti-aircraft guns brought the total to 162, more radar was installed, and damage control equipment was improved. When Yamato left dry dock on January 3, 1945, she was as ready as any battleship could be for a war now dominated by air power. But readiness was meaningless. There was no fuel for sustained operations, no air cover for sorties, and no strategic purpose left for battleships in this transformed war. Captain Kosaku Aruga assumed command on November 25, 1944. A seasoned officer, he had vast experience with both cruisers and battleships. By March 1945, American forces were approaching Okinawa, only 350 miles south of Kyushu. The capture of Okinawa promised airfields and anchorages for the eventual invasion of Japan itself. On March 19th, Task Force 58 unleashed over 300 aircraft on Kure Naval Base. The raid tore through anchored Japanese warships. Yamato herself was hit on the bridge and damaged by near misses. 5 crew members died. Dozens more were wounded. Just days later, American forces landed on Okinawa on April 1st. The invasion met little initial resistance. as Japanese troops retreated into the island's rugged interior to prepare defenses. In a March 1945 conference in Tokyo, Emperor Hirohito was briefed on Okinawa's defense. The Army explained elaborate ground preparations and the coming wave of kamikaze attacks. Then came the fateful question that would seal Yamato's destiny. But what about the Navy? What are they doing to assist in defending Okinawa? Have we no more ships? The Navy, humiliated by years of defeat and powerless to prevent American forces from reaching Japan, felt compelled to demonstrate its existence, its fighting spirit. Admiral Somu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, ordered the development of an operation using the few remaining surface ships. The plan was called Tengo, Heaven Number 1, Yamato, the light cruiser Yahagi, and 8 destroyers would sortie from the inland sea, traverse the East China Sea, and strike the American forces at Okinawa. The plan was desperate. The ships would fight through American naval defenses, beach themselves on Okinawa, and use their guns as immobile coastal artillery until destroyed. Any surviving crew would join the Army garrison on shore, fighting to the death. When Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito, commander of the Second Fleet, learned of the plan on April 5th, he was furious. It was a meaningless sacrifice of ships and men, doomed from the start. There would be no air cover beyond the first few hours. Submarines and reconnaissance aircraft would spot the force immediately. American carrier task forces would intercept them long before reaching Okinawa. Fuel was insufficient even for a return to Japan. Ito refused to order the operation at first, arguing its futility. But the directive came from the highest levels, and he eventually relented, reportedly calling it a senseless waste. At 16 Oz on April 6, 1945, Yamato departed the Tokoyama oil depot for the last time. Fueled for a one-way mission to Okinawa, she was joined by Yahagi and 8 destroyers. Around 3,000 sailors manned the fleet. Before departure, crews were assembled and told the grim truth. Any man could remain behind without shame. Imagine standing there, knowing the odds, the destination, the mission's inevitability. Would you stay aboard or step aside? None stepped aside. Only around 67 junior officer candidates and some sick or injured sailors were left behind, spared to preserve trained personnel for the fleet's future. Shortly after midnight on April 7th, the force slipped silently through the Bungo Strait between Kyushu and Shikoku. Unbeknownst to them, American submarines, USS Threadfin and USS Hackleback lay in wait, guided by intelligence intercepts that had revealed the contours of Operation Tengo days in advance. All night, the submarines tracked the Japanese fleet, transmitting regular position reports. Yamato's crew knew they were being followed, yet there was nothing they could do. Imagine knowing your enemy is stalking you through the night and feeling utterly powerless. As dawn broke, the Japanese force passed the Osumi Peninsula and entered the open waters of the East China Sea. The ships formed a defensive circle, Yahagi leading, Yamato at the heart, and 8 destroyers spaced 1,500 meters apart in a protective ring. Speed was increased to 20 knots. By 06 WOW, 6 Mitsubishi A6M00 fighters arrived, the entire extent of Japanese air cover. Their orders remain until 10, then return to base. After that, Yamato would face the full might of American air power alone. The morning was overcast, clouds hung low at 3,000 feet, rain squalls spattered intermittently, and visibility shifted from clear to nearly zero. At 0823, American reconnaissance aircraft first spotted the Japanese force. An F-6F Hellcat from USS Essex pierced a break in the clouds, revealing Yamato's unmistakable silhouette. The pilot transmitted his report, and within minutes, Task Force 58 was mobilized. Vice Admiral Mark Mitchell, aboard his flagship USS Bunker Hill, commanded a force beyond imagination. 16 aircraft carriers, 8 fast battleships, 15 cruisers, more than 60 destroyers, and over 1,000 aircraft. Mitchell had expected Yamato. American intelligence had intercepted and decoded Japanese communications detailing Operation Tengo. Upon confirmation, Mitchell wasted no time. Admiral Raymond Spruance of the Fifth Fleet had initially ordered his battleships under Rear Admiral Morton Deo to intercept. 6 modern battleships, including USS Missouri and USS Wisconsin, began to maneuver to engage Yamato in surface combat. But Mitchell, understanding the lethal efficiency of carrier aviation, preempted the engagement, launching aircraft without waiting for Spruance's approval. Carrier planes could destroy Yamato more efficiently, with far less risk than a surface battle, and Spruance accepted the decision. At Tenascau, Task Groups 58.1 and 58.3 began launching their aircraft. The carriers USS Hornet, Bennington, Belleau Wood, San Jacinto, Essex, Bunker Hill, Hancock, and Bataan sent 280 planes into the sky in the first wave. 132 fighters, F-6F Hellcats and F-4U Corsairs, 50 SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers, and 98 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. 15 minutes later, 53 aircraft from USS Hancock launched, but failed to locate the Japanese fleet in the poor weather, reducing the first wave to 227 aircraft. A second wave of 110 planes from USS Yorktown, Intrepid, and Langley followed 45 minutes later. In total, 386 American aircraft were committed, though only around 280 would actually reach Yamato due to navigation difficulties in the low clouds. Each Avenger carried a Mark 13 torpedo with a 600-pound Torpex warhead. Each Helldiver bore a 1,000-pound bomb, either armor-piercing or general-purpose, plus 2 250-pound bombs. Fighters carried bombs or rockets in addition to machine guns and cannons. At 10:14, Yamato's air search radar detected the first American reconnaissance aircraft. The 6 Japanese Zero fighters engaged, but were hopelessly outnumbered. Not a single American plane was shot down. By 10 a.m., Yamato and her escorts faced the American strike force alone. By 11 a.m., enemy aircraft circled the Japanese fleet just outside anti-aircraft range, like a cloud of predators sizing up their prey. Pilots coordinated meticulously, dividing into strike groups with deadly precision. The experience of 3 years of Pacific combat was evident in every maneuver. At 12:32, lookouts aboard Yamato spotted the first attack formations. Captain Hara on Yahagi later described the sight as terrifying. Planes swirling in clockwise and counterclockwise orbits around the fleet, circling like wolves stalking a herd. At 12:34, Yamato opened fire with her forward main turrets, discharging Sanchikidan shells anti-aircraft munitions designed to scatter steel fragments in a deadly shotgun pattern. Firing 18-inch guns at aircraft was desperation incarnate. The shells were useless. The Americans flew through the explosions untouched. By 12:37, the first wave of attackers struck. Dive bombers plunged through clouds, pulling up at the last second to release their deadly payloads. Torpedo bombers skimmed the waves from multiple directions. Fighter bombers strafed the decks with machine guns and cannons, mowing down exposed anti-aircraft crews. The storm of fire and steel had begun, and Yamato was trapped at the center, a titan under siege from the skies. The noise was deafening. Imagine standing on the deck of a steel giant under siege. 162 anti-aircraft guns fired relentlessly, mixing their thunderous roar with the crack of bombs exploding around you, the screams of diving aircraft, and the shouted commands of damage control parties fighting to keep the ship alive. At 12:41, 2 bombs tore into Yamato's upper deck, obliterating 2 triple 25mm anti-aircraft mounts and killing their crews. The deck was pocked with holes, yet vital spaces below remained intact. Just 4 minutes later, a torpedo slammed into the port side forward, sending shock waves through the hull. Flooding began in the forward compartments, but watertight doors held. Yamato still moved, still fought, still defied death. At 12:46, 2 bombs struck near the aft centerline turret. One landed directly atop the turret, smashing through its armored roof and detonating inside. Almost the entire crew of the turret was killed. Only a single man survived. Between 12:48 and 12:50, 2 or 3 more torpedoes struck amidships on the port side, hitting the engine and boiler rooms. Water surged through the compartments. Counter-flooding was initiated on the starboard side to correct the growing list, but the ship's fate was already slipping from human hands. The first wave of the attack lasted 18 minutes. When the American planes withdrew, damage assessment teams reported to Captain Kosaku Aruga 5 torpedo hits, 4 bomb strikes, serious flooding, but the ship still made 20 knots. Anti-aircraft guns, though reduced, remained operational. Then at 13:02, radar detected the second wave. 50 aircraft from USS Essex and USS Baton approached. At 13:22, an Essex F-4U Corsair dropped a 1,000-pound bomb on Yamato's port bow. Helldivers followed, striking the bridge. Anti-aircraft fire damaged 5 of the attackers, proving Yamato's defenses were still dangerous, but the punishment had only begun. Between 13:25 and 13:30, 3 or 4 torpedoes struck amidships on the port side, deliberately concentrated to tip the massive ship. Flooding accelerated in the boiler rooms and engine spaces. The list to port exceeded 10 degrees. Captain Aruga faced an impossible choice. The starboard outer engine room would have to be flooded to prevent capsizing. Doing so would doom the 300 men working there. Without hesitation, he opened the valves. Seawater gushed in, drowning them at their posts. By 13:33, the third wave arrived. 110 aircraft from USS Yorktown, Intrepid, and Langley descended on a crippled, burning battleship. Yamato, already listing and slowed, was an easier target. Pilots later described her movements: slow circles, trailing oil, flames licking multiple locations, yet every gun still firing at the sky, defiance incarnate. Between 13:33 and 14:02, she took at least 4 more torpedoes and several bombs. Fires raged across the superstructure. Flooding was uncontrollable. The list to port grew relentlessly despite desperate counter-flooding. The battleship slowed to 10 knots, then 5. Steering failed. At 14:02, Captain Aruga learned from his executive officer that the damage control teams were dead. Counter-flooding could no longer save the ship. Yamato was doomed. He ordered the remaining crew to abandon ship. Vice Admiral Ito sent a final signal via flag hoist, canceling the operation and instructing the surviving ships to withdraw. Radio systems were destroyed. Flag signals were the only link to command. Ito retired to his cabin, never to emerge. Aruga tied himself to the binnacle on the bridge, choosing to go down with the ship. At 14:07, another torpedo struck the starboard side. 10 minutes later, 2 more struck the port side. The uncorrected list passed 15 degrees. Alarms screamed warnings of critical temperatures in the forward main battery magazines. Flood pumps failed. Ammunition began to cook off. At 14:20, Yamato capsized completely to port. Over 2,000 men remained aboard, many trapped below decks as water flooded their compartments. As the ship rolled past 90 degrees, seawater surged into the funnel uptakes, flooding superheated boilers and producing a massive steam explosion simultaneously uncontrolled fires reached the forward magazines, igniting hundreds of tons of propellant. At 14:23, Yamato exploded. The detonation hurled a mushroom cloud 20,000 feet into the sky, audible and visible over 100 miles. The blast wave was so immense that even American aircraft overhead suffered damage. The mighty battleship broke into two main sections and sank to 340 meters, 200 miles northwest of Okinawa. Of 3,132 crew members, only 276 survived. The Americans had attacked for 1 hour and 46 minutes. Yamato had been struck by an estimated 11 to 13 torpedoes and 6 to 15 bombs. American losses were 10 aircraft and 12 crew. The disparity was staggering. The light cruiser Yahagi and 4 destroyers were also sunk. The remaining 4 destroyers rescued survivors and withdrew to Japan, leaving the Pacific forever marked by the destruction of history's largest battleship. The Battle of the East China Sea marked the decisive triumph of carrier aviation over the age of the battleship. Yamato's destruction reverberated through Japan like a shockwave. For the first time, the government publicly acknowledged that its greatest warship had been lost. The announcement painted the mission in heroic terms, claiming that Yamato had fought valiantly against overwhelming odds to defend Okinawa. The reality was far harsher. Yamato had achieved nothing. She sank no American ships. She prevented no landings. She never even reached visual range of Okinawa. Her voyage added roughly 3,000 names to the casualty lists, a grim testament to desperation rather than glory. For the United States Navy, the sinking of Yamato confirmed an undeniable truth. Aircraft carriers had supplanted battleships as the ultimate capital ships. The lessons learned would shape naval doctrine for decades. Concentrated air attacks could obliterate any surface target. Coordinated carrier groups multiplied this lethality. Focusing torpedo strikes on a single side could accelerate capsize. Survivors carried the memory of that day for the rest of their lives. Ensign Mitsuru Yoshida, the radar officer who had written in his journal before the battle, survived hours in the oil-stained sea before being rescued by a destroyer. After the war, he chronicled Yamato's final voyage in Requiem for Battleship Yamato, a meticulous account that became a bestseller in Japan. Yoshida described the psychological weight of serving aboard a ship everyone knew was doomed, the knowledge of certain death, yet discipline never faltering, men moving to their posts, performing their duties, dying without panic. American commanders pored over the battle reports, analyzing every detail. Torpedoes proved far more deadly than bombs against heavily armored warships. Yamato's guns and armor had shrugged off countless bomb hits. But torpedoes struck below the armored belt where vulnerability lay. Concentrated attacks on one side caused uncontrollable flooding and rapid capsize. Coordination between dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and fighters maximized the fleet's lethality. Fighters suppressed anti-aircraft fire. Dive bombers pinned the ship, and torpedo bombers delivered the fatal blows. The sheer number of aircraft overwhelmed every Japanese defense. Despite thousands of shells fired, Yamato's anti-aircraft guns downed only 10 American planes. The strategic implications extended far beyond tactical lessons. Yamato's sacrifice reflected Japan's desperation in April 1945. Operation Tengo was never a rational military calculation. It was political, psychological, a demonstration of resolve. American planners understood this mindset and feared it. If Japan was willing to send 3,000 sailors to certain death in a hopeless sortie, what would happen during an invasion of the home islands? The Battle of Okinawa, still raging when Yamato sank, would answer that question with over 100,000 Japanese soldiers and civilians dead. After the war, Yamato became a symbol, a monument to technical brilliance and tragic futility. Her story permeated Japanese culture. In 1974, the anime series Space Battleship Yamato imagined the sunken ship resurrected as a spacecraft saving Earth, a tale of hope rising from tragedy, establishing a template for space opera anime. In 2005, the film Yamato portrayed the ship's final voyage through multiple crew members' eyes, earning over 5 billion yen at the box office. That same year, the Yamato Museum opened in Kure, 60 years after the sinking, featuring a massive 1/10 scale model, artifacts, photographs, and detailed exhibits about her construction and service. Drawing hundreds of thousands of visitors annually, expeditions have located and photographed the wreck. Yamato rests in two main sections on the seafloor, 340 meters below, protected by Japanese law as a war grave. Her 3,000 men remain with her, silent witnesses to history, forever enshrined in the depths of the East China Sea. Yamato's story is both a testament to human ingenuity and a somber reminder. No matter how mighty, steel alone cannot defy the tides of modern warfare, and yet the ship's legacy endures, haunting the imagination, inspiring stories, and reminding us of courage, sacrifice, and the inexorable march of history. The historical evaluation of Yamato's value remains fiercely debated. Was she a crowning achievement of naval engineering, the ultimate triumph of battleship design? Or was she a colossal misstep, a behemoth built too late, a dinosaur lumbering into an era that had already passed? Both perspectives hold truth. Yamato was a masterpiece of construction, revolutionary design, immense firepower, impenetrable armor. She represented the absolute pinnacle of battleship development. Yet strategy had already overtaken her before her guns ever fired. The resources poured into Yamato and her sister ship Musashi were staggering. The steel alone could have built some 45 destroyers or 6 large aircraft carriers, assets Japan desperately needed throughout the war. The fuel Yamato consumed during her brief career could have powered dozens of smaller warships on effective combat missions. The 3,000 sailors who died on April 7, 1945, trained, disciplined, experienced, were irreplaceable. Strategically, Yamato consumed enormous resources and produced almost no results. And yet, Yamato remains undeniably awe-inspiring. She embodied the absolute limit of battleship design. Her 18-inch guns were the largest ever mounted on a warship. Her armor was the thickest ever fitted to any vessel. Her displacement remains the record for battleships, a record that will never be broken because no navy will build battleships again. In this sense, Yamato achieved immortality not through combat, but as the definitive final statement of an entire class of warship. For the American pilots who sank her, Yamato was history in motion. They destroyed the heaviest battleship ever built. Yet for most, it was just another mission in a long, grinding war. Letters sent home described the size of the ship, the intensity of her anti-aircraft fire, but there was little celebration. By April 1945, American aviators were professionals, executing a job they had been trained and tested to do. Destroying Yamato was satisfying, but not shocking. They had the experience, the aircraft, the numbers, everything needed to obliterate any ship afloat. This contrast American professionalism versus Japanese sacrifice defined the Pacific War's final year. The Americans brought overwhelming material superiority and methodical tactical planning. The Japanese, lacking fuel, air cover, and strategy, resorted to suicidal sorties meant to intimidate, not to achieve. Yamato's mission fit this pattern perfectly. It was never meant to succeed militarily. Spirit without strategy is tragic, not victorious. Yamato's 3,000 dead did not delay the American advance by a single day. Okinawa fell. American bombers soon struck the Japanese home islands with impunity. 4 months after Yamato sank, Japan surrendered unconditionally. The cruelest irony is that Yamato died exactly as American forces intended. Her mission to Okinawa drew her into open water, exposing her to the full might of carrier aviation. Had she remained in port, she could have posed a serious threat during an invasion. But Japan's leadership chose gesture over strategy, sacrificing their most powerful asset. American commanders could hardly believe their fortune when intelligence confirmed Operation Tango. Task Force 58 obliged, destroying her completely. Today, Yamato rests on the sea floor of the East China Sea, a tomb for 3,000 men and a monument to the end of the battleship era. She never fought the decisive surface engagement Japanese planners had imagined. She never justified the staggering resources invested in her creation. And yet, she endures not for triumph in battle, but as the ultimate expression of human engineering within the constraints of battleship design. Japanese admirals boasted that Yamato was unsinkable, invincible in surface combat. They were right. She was the most powerful battleship ever built. But unsinkable, nearly 400 American aircraft and less than 2 hours of combat proved that claim catastrophically wrong. Yamato sank because the rules of naval warfare had fundamentally changed. No battleship, no matter how mighty, could survive in a world dominated by air power. The age of the battleship died with Yamato on April 7, 1945. What replaced it was the age of the aircraft carrier, and in that contest, Japan had already lost.